Welcome to the Super Gamer Podcast. Welcome to the new Super Gamer Podcast, episode maybe 160. Our guest this week is a violinist, a violist, the founder of Gamer Symphony Orchestra out of the University of Maryland, a podcaster and interviewer. We have MeowsicalVGM, Michelle Eng. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I should say, we were just talking before we started here, MeowsicalVGM is sort of your VGM performance name. Michelle Eng is your name. But the first thing I want to ask, University of Maryland, obviously that's where you went, that's where you founded the Gamer Symphony Orchestra. But what's up with Maryland? Why is that such a video game music haven?
Well, when I started the Gamer Symphony Orchestra at the University of Maryland, I just happened to go to Maryland, and that's just where I happened to start it. And I think it just is a combination of the right place at the right time. So I actually first started the group because I was inspired by Video Games Live, and it was a YouTube video that I saw online, and I just thought it would be really cool to play video game music in an orchestra. So I started it because I went to University of Maryland. But the reason, to answer your question about why Maryland seems to be such a haven, I think it's a combination of me starting the group, but also MagFest, which is a amazing music and gaming festival. That's also located in Maryland. So I think the combination of meeting all these people every year at MagFest, but also my group being there, started to create this haven in Maryland. But additionally, when the students graduated from the University of Maryland and, they went to work, some of them, so the situation was that, once you leave the university, you start working, you're no longer at the school. However, a lot of the students that came through the school who were part of the GSO, or the Gamer Symphony Orchestra, they were very passionate about it. They didn't want to stop being part of a video game orchestra, so they want to start their own orchestra. So two orchestras in the area. One is the Baltimore Gamer Symphony Orchestra, and the other is the Washington Metropolitan Gamer Symphony Orchestra. And they so happen to be both located in Maryland. And it was the alums of the GSO at Maryland that went to start those two orchestras. Simply because, they didn't want to stop playing the GSO because it was just something that they were very passionate about, and they wanted to continue after, they graduated from the university.
And this sort of spreading of gamer symphonies is something you're very passionate about, and is kind of the subject of your podcast, Gamer Symphony Dreams, where you interview people who have gone on to make symphonies about gaming around the USA.
Yes, that's right. So I am very passionate about helping other people start their own video game orchestra. And so in 2020, when the pandemic first hit, I was originally interviewed by Aaron Barker, who is the current president and founder of the Des Moines Gamer Symphony Orchestra, located in Des Moines, Iowa. He actually was an alum of both the Gamer Symphony Orchestra at Maryland and the Washington Metropolitan Gamer Symphony Orchestra. So he was actually an alum of two groups. And I interviewed him on my podcast, GSO Dreams. And how that kind of happened was, during the pandemic, everything went online. And as part of kind of culture building and outreach, Aaron interviewed me for a video for his orchestra. And he featured me as a guest in his interview. So that's kind of how I started my podcast, because of him. I actually interviewed him as my first guest too. So that started in 2020. And then I interviewed I think I did 9 podcasts, and then I decided to take a break. But I'm starting that back up. I'm going to start interviewing more people to kind of tell the stories of the people involved in these video game orchestras. And I initially had the idea of doing this primarily to help other people to start and run their own video game orchestras. But I also, after my recent panel at VGM Con, where I talked about the social impact of community video game orchestras, I actually want to start featuring more stories of people who are in it. So they may not necessarily have been the founders or currently running it, but I really want to tell the stories of the people in the video game orchestra community, because I think it's had such a positive impact on their life.
You started the GSO in 2005. It started off with like 5-10 people. It has since grown to more than 120 people. And it sounds like right off the hop, like you were obviously scared, a little nervous of bringing this up. You asked your conductor at the time, hey, I kind of want to play video game music. What do I do? They encouraged you to bring it up at a rehearsal, and you took it from there. I do know, though, can you tell us about the story of you were trying to advertise this, hey, people join our Gamer Symphony, and you brought it to the U of Maryland Symphony Orchestra, and you got laughed at. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So when I had the idea, I was like, this is really cool. And so I was a very, very shy student, and I wasn't someone who had a lot of confidence. And so I'm I'm an introverted person, so it wasn't necessarily my strong suite to be leading a group like maybe you see me now. So it was quite challenging for me, and I was very nervous about posing this idea, because I was like, well, that's such a nerdy idea. What if people laugh at me? And I remember my conductor said you should make an announcement, and I actually typed out what I was going to say on a piece of paper, because that's how nervous I was. And I remember that rehearsal that I had to make that announcement. I unfolded that piece of paper from my pocket, and then I read it out loud, and I was just very nervous about the whole thing. And I didn't know what to expect, but then I got a couple people interested. So that's kind of how that initial group started with the repertoire orchestra. Now, in terms of advertising, I did contact, I think, some staff in the School of Music and say, hey, can I go to your other ensembles to recruit musicians? So one of the groups I did go to was University of Maryland Symphony Orchestra. So I just remember going to the front of the room while they were in rehearsal, and I don't remember this very clearly, but I made an announcement, and I think people laughed. I don't know if they thought it was a funny idea or just a nerdy idea, but I did not get any musicians from that group to join the GSO. So I tried, I think, every group that I could to join the GSO. And so after that, I decided to create a Facebook group for the GSO, and that's kind of how the people from the school's marching band found me. So I believe, so it was fall of 2005 where GSO started. And I created the Facebook group, and then the marching band people messaged me on Facebook, and they're like, hey, why don't we just meet up? Do you want to come to our I think it was a basketball game that they were playing at. So afterwards, I remember I met up with a couple of them, and we were walking through the halls of the stadium, or the indoor, the sports center. And I remember one of them was just humming the tune of Tetris, and it was so exciting. Hey, we got this group of people together. It's cool that these other people are interested in this. And so they didn't really join until I would say the following semester because that basketball game took place in December of 2005. So that's kind of how we started doing the marketing. And then I created flyers. So like when you're on a university campus, there's different ways you can advertise. So I would, put like a little blurb and send out to these listservs I was part of. On campus, you have like different listservs that you can join. So that's kind of how I got the word out. And then I think from there, it kind of spread through word of mouth because people were saying, "Oh, join this GSO thing. It's cool." And, they would tell their friends and, "Oh yeah, I'm interested in video game music." So I think that's kind of how it eventually spread. But in the beginning, I did have to do a little bit more effort into marketing.
By the end of 2010, the GSO was selling out 1,100 person venues. So did you ever like go back to the symphony like, not so funny now, is it?
Well, I personally didn't because I'd graduated by that time, but I know there was I know that like video game music isn't always taken seriously by people who are more involved in classical music. So that's one of the challenges that I think we've had to face at the school. And after talking with other founders from other universities who started video game orchestras, they face similar issues with their music departments. Part of the reason is due to the fact that because we are a non-music major ensemble, they have to give priority to the music majors and the music major ensembles because, they're paying tuition for the use of the facilities and the professors and things like that. So I think that's part of it. But I do think there might be a little bit of like, oh, that's just video game music. That's not really real music. Now, I do think the perception of the GSO at Maryland did change over time when we were able to bring in larger audiences. So I think we've had to earn the respect of, I think, the music department. I don't remember which year it was, but I think the conductor of the University Symphony Orchestra, he actually did come to one of the concerts. But I can't remember off the top of my head what year it was, but eventually it was something that I think they eventually gained their respect at Maryland, and now I think it's one of the most popular clubs on campus. So you can kind of think of GSO as the underdog. With all that said, I do have a deep respect for classical music. It's the orchestra music I grew up playing before I started the GSO. And I do actually think there's a lot of opportunities for classical orchestras and for video game orchestras to work together. So I think it's just expanding that, what's part of orchestral music. And I recently read a very interesting book called The War on Music, and it talks about the evolution of how classical orchestras, eventually, as they develop over time into the Romantic era, etc., that went into, one path went to atonal music, which you see in a lot of the universities, but the other path that went into Hollywood music. And then if you study orchestral history, I think a lot of the video game music now grows out of that, what was done in Hollywood. So it's all interconnected. I don't feel like there has to be any kind of animosity or division between classical music and video game music. And I think they can work together really beautifully. And you can see that with the really great success. I think it was even yesterday, they had a Final Symphony concert, and Final Symphony is a concert series that puts together long-form symphonic poem types of video game music arrangements that reflect more traditional long-form movements of how normally it's done a typical classical orchestra arrangement. So I think I think VGM, only recently we've had like Grammys for or being featured in the BBC proms. So it's definitely getting the recognition it deserves, but I definitely do think that there's a lot more opportunity to grow in this, area.
I definitely think it's got to be a matter of time. Like locally, our Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, where I am, they do, and I'm sure lots of places do this. They'll play the score to Lord of the Rings, on a special night, or The Hobbit, or what have you. Like, surely we're getting close to, hey, they're going to be doing the music from Final Fantasy this night. Like, so like you say, the interconnectedness and the idea that they're kind of getting classical orchestras and VGM is kind of getting closer together. I definitely agree.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you think if your conductor hadn't been so supportive of your idea, like considering how nervous you were and all that, do you think you would have gone through with forming GSO, or how instrumental was your conductor in making you go through with it?
Oh, I think, I don't know if I would have started it, to be honest, if he didn't encourage me, because being someone who's like very introverted and very shy, I don't know if I would have gotten the courage to do it. And he played a really instrumental role. His name is Paul Kim, and I have him to thank for everything, I think, when it came to the GSO. It's very easy, I think, to discourage someone and say, no, that's a weird idea, or no, that's not real music. But he was open-minded about it. And at the time, he was a graduate student getting his degree in conducting. And the way it worked with the repertoire orchestra at my school is that the repertoire orchestra is mainly for non-music majors, and the graduate students who are learning conducting, they run the repertoire orchestra. So he was the one who was responsible for teaching us how to use the music notation software such as Sibelius and Finale. In our school, we had a music lab where you can go to the lab and use this music notation software. And I didn't know anything about it when I first started. I didn't know how to use it, and he really took the time to sit down and teach us. In the early days, we didn't know what we were doing. We just found MIDIs online and downloaded them and just imported them into our music notation software to try to create scores. And so he was really patient in showing us how to do that. And I remember, I think that was the second GSO meeting we ever had. We spent the whole, because we didn't know what we were doing, and where do we start? So we started off by listening to video game soundtracks, and I remember he was there, just sitting in, and as part of he wasn't he didn't end up being part of the GSO, but in the very beginning he spent some time with us to kind of be kind of, I guess, social with us. He socialized with us. He came to the so GSO has a tradition of going out to dinner after rehearsals, and I remember the December 2005, he and a couple of other GSO people came to my apartment for dinner. That was the first GSO dinner I think we ever did. So he was friendly with us. He wasn't officially part of our group, but he was instrumental in really helping us, and I'm very, very grateful for him.
Did you ever find out if Nobuo Uematsu actually got to listen to GSO music? I know you met him and asked him a question at was it MagFest? And then he had said an aside, he didn't know what the GSO was, but that he was interested, and he'd get someone to get a recording or something like that.
Oh, so I think he actually did hear the GSO, but because of the language barrier, I think he might have not fully understood what I was asking.
I see.
Yeah, so I think that's what it was. But later I found out that he did know what the GSO was.
Did he have any comments? Did you ever find out, like, did he say, like, yeah, this is good?
I don't know specifically, but I do know that I think it was at that MagFest in 2012. So MagFest, it was like the Sunday, so the last day. A bunch of people from the UMGSO, I think this was kind of like a last minute thing. They actually sang the Promised Land from Final Fantasy VII Advent Children for him and the Earthbound Papas. But because I went home already and nobody said anything and I didn't know that they were going to perform for him, I completely missed it. But later there was a video that surfaced that the people from the UMGSO sang for him and his band, and he was like, I don't remember what his reaction was, but I think he was like clapping afterwards.
Cool.
Yeah.
When you were a kid and you and your sisters used to role play as Mario, Luigi, and Peach, which were you? Were you Mario, Luigi, or Peach?
I think I was Mario.
All right. Main character.
Yeah.
That story, though, you know, as kids do, you were role playing the games you played. Your dad was Bowser, but unbeknownst to your dad, you were trying to save the princess from Bowser, despite Bowser not knowing he was even involved.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, you know, like kids have such big imaginations, so, you know, you assign this person's the bad guy or whatever.
Did your dad ever catch on? Was he like, "What is happening? Why are you here?"
I don't think so.
What is the proper way to pronounce famous?
Oh my god, how do you know all of this stuff? So I remember I was like trying to teach people how to say it, but you can either pronounce it say the F's individually, like, or you can just I think you use more air. You can do the other way, which is famous. Famous. Either one's okay.
What's the genesis of that? Where did famous come from?
Okay, so do you know who Stream Player Gamer is?
Yeah.
So when Stream Player Gamer, well, we became friends. We met in, I think, 2018, and then we became friends. He started getting all these opportunities, like, and so I thought he came up with it, but he's like, no, you came up with it. So I was like, you're becoming famous. Like, you're getting all these like opportunities, and you're becoming more famous, basically. So that's kind of where it came from, and I guess it became my tagline. And then people liked it, so I just started using it.
You back to the music. You just presented a panel virtually at VGMCon, which I was just at, the social impact of community VGM orchestras. Fair to say, I think the gist of it is the social impact is good.
Mm-hmm, yeah, I think so.
It seems, if I'm not wrong, you had a survey out and you got people to rate who were involved in VGM orchestras from 1 to 5, 1 being bad, 5 being very good. You know, what the impact has been on their lives. And I don't think you got even lower than a 3 on that. And I think there's only 1 3.
Yeah, that's right.
So across the board, good.
Yes, I think it's been a very positive reaction.
You tell a lot of stories about it, but I'll ask you, you know, what is it you think, why is it such a positive thing for people? Is it something they, you know, you say in the panel that it brings people together, they make friends, they're enthusiastic about it, but like, is it unique to VGM orchestras? You know, as opposed to a classical orchestra?
Well, I think for one thing, if you look at the interactivity of the game itself, like, let's say you play Breath of the Wild, I think because you play as Link and you're linked to that character, like the physical action of playing the game itself, you feel more connected because you're controlling the character's actions. So, like, let's say I play Breath of the Wild, I'm very much more connected than if I'm just watching a movie, let's say. Even though there are a lot of fans of, different kind of movies, there is something different about, I think, being connected in that way, but also with video games music. You're spending so many hours playing the game, and you're hearing hours and hours of soundtrack music, as opposed to if you're watching a movie, it's maybe like a 2-hour movie, let's say. So I think there's that, but also if you look at the game series, The Legend of Zelda has been around for such a long time. So there's this ongoing legacy of being connected to these characters over long periods of time. So you get just from the video game portion of it, you get really connected to it, to the story. And I think the fact that there's constantly new games coming out, it's like you have something new to look forward to and to be excited about. So I think sometimes with movies, like once it's over, you either have to move on or something like that, unless it's a movie franchise that is still going. So I think there's that element of it, but also there's a certain aspect, I think, of gamers and video game people who listen to video game music that I think there is a certain vulnerability about it. Like what I said earlier about maybe video game music not being taken seriously or being laughed at or not treated as a legitimate genre. I think there is a sense of well, I like video game music, but it's like a very niche thing. And I don't know if anybody else is into it, but I really like it. And so this is something I even heard from a conversation, I think it was during MagFest, someone mentioned that just admitting you like video game music is such a vulnerable thing to do. So I think there's that element of it. And so I think that combined with hey, I like video games and I like music and I'm also a musician, that's cool. But then when you can bring 100 people together and do the same thing and kind of co-create that experience, it's just incredible. And I think part of it is because it's so rare in the sense of I know there's more classical orchestras than there are video game orchestras that exist. So we're lucky here in Maryland to have so many, just because that's kind of where it started. But I also think people are surprised. Sometimes I'll tell people I started video game orchestras and they're not gamers and they're not musicians, and they're like, what? What did you do? And they're very surprised by it. So it's sort of one of those things that's hidden in plain sight, where the thought never occurred to them that this kind of thing could exist. And so I think the musicians who like video game music, once they learn about that, hey, you can do this, it's a thing, they get really, really excited about it. So it's I think that's that desire of wanting to also live the story of the video game that makes them so excited, because a lot of this music that we hear in video games, they tell a story. And I think, I've done some reading on depth psychology and mythology and things like that. And humans, we can't live by bread alone. We have to have meaning in our lives. So I think, for modern people, I think the way they stay connected to the mythological aspects of our culture is through things like movies and video games. And so I think there is an underlying cultural phenomena where people are looking for meaning, and you need to have something to live for, and you have to feel like you you have a purpose, you know? So I think this video game orchestra where the stories are already embedded in the music and people know the stories because they play the games, it makes it come so much more alive for them. And, you know, all the drama and the story that you see, you know, doing the battle or, you know, training to go out to the battlefield or saving the princess or whatever. People, I think, need to feel like they're part of some kind of dramatic story. So I think that's part of it as well. But I've definitely seen there is this element of the underdog where you feel like, well, I like this very nerdy thing and maybe not everyone appreciates it. But when I can find other people who are the same as me and love the same thing as me, it's something I can be proud of. So, you know, I mentioned that in my panel where I feel like a lot of the people that I've met, they've felt like misfits or outsiders, maybe in like where they grew up or just not fitting in. And, you know, this fits very well with the story, I think, of The Legend of Zelda particularly. It's often those who are the outsiders or those that are the ones that are different. You see this in the movies and video games. It's not just video games, but movies, you see that it's part of the hero's journey. Often they're portrayed as orphans or things like that in a lot of these cinematic stories, but the one that's different is also the chosen one to be a hero. And I think people need something to look up to that's uplifting and positive. So I would say it's a combination of factors, but I think these are the combination of factors of all the things I've just mentioned. I think that's what creates that excitement and enthusiasm for the people in the GSO.
Along the lines of you were talking about, you know, for some people, the concept of video game music is just not on their radar. So going to VGM Con, you know, telling coworkers about it. I mean, like, and I'm 36, and I think video games are pretty ubiquitous at this point. Like, I'm not in any way embarrassed to say I'm going to that, but talking to certain coworkers, I just know it's like that's video game music is a phrase that has never been in their mind. So it's sort of they're like, oh, what are you going to Minnesota for? And I'm like, oh, it's a video game music conference. And you can just see like their brain stop for a second. Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Last thing I'll ask about, you know, as far as encouraging people to start or get involved in a video game orchestra, I know you've talked about the Triforce of starting a video game orchestra, which is sheet music, performers, and a place to rehearse. Those are the things you need. But any advice along that line or otherwise that you have for anyone who wants to get involved?
I would say talk to as many people who have done it as you can. Watch my podcast series to get more information. And I'm happy to talk with anyone individually as well. I think, like, my advice would be do as much research as you can just to avoid the pitfalls. Try to learn from other people's mistakes. And you'll see some of that on the podcast series of, like, what not to do. Just so an orchestra has a lot of moving parts, and I would say, like, learn as much as you can. Just get as much education about the topic as you can. So I would say, you know, it's just a lot involved. So I think it depends on what. So the way I would think about it is it depends if you're a student trying to start one at your school or one in the community. There's kind of like a different approach I would have for each. I think student clubs are probably easier to start just because everything's on campus, right? So all the resources are there. Another thing is for the community, there's more stuff you have to be aware of, like business entity, like what business entity you want to do. And then you have to set up systems so that you're making sure you're accounting for your money correctly and things like that. So there's more things that you have to be aware of. So take your time to do the research and talk to people, get as much information as you can. But I think just in general, don't be afraid to just jump in and just do it and see, what happens. But I would always recommend, if you're not sure about how to approach something, I'm always available to personally help anyone who wants to start one. Just make friends, just be professional, whoever you interact with. And, I think as long as you're polite and you're adding value to your community or whoever you work with, I think it should work out well. So that's what I would say for just kind of general advice.
All right, and people can find you, MeowsicalVGM, on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram. That's MEowsicalVGM. Michelle Eng, thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much.